So now to talk about the American Welding Society and where it might go in the future. There's a lot of different directions you can go in the future, and as sometimes attributed to Niels Bohr, it's very difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. It's much easier to predict the past. George Santayana, a philosopher at Harvard, said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." We've talked about the past in terms of the age of electrical engineering, the age of necessity, World War I, and then World War II, the second age of necessity, invention, steel metallurgy, high alloys, productivity, and quality bringing us up to where we are today. In the future, we have to ask ourselves, what are going to be the drivers in the future over the next 50 years? Well, the first is the billion-pound per year club, and I'll describe what that means. There's also the trillion joints per year club. There's the trillion-dollar club, and that we can talk about aging infrastructure, construction, healthcare, national security, all of which involve joining. And there's also another one which is perhaps the largest of all, which is transfer payments, which in fact joining really doesn't have much to do with that. But let's talk about structural materials and how many things are in the billion-ton per year club. If we're talking about the world, the entire world, number one in terms of a structural material is crushed stone, 50 billion tons a year. Number two is concrete at 4.2 billion tons per year. Number three is engineered wood products at 1.8. We haven't gotten to anything that really is part of the American Welding Society. These are huge opportunity areas. Number four is actually what the American Welding Society was built on, and that's the steel industry, which is currently at 1.6 billion tons. But that's number four. Now, if you actually start asking what's the next largest, you could say all plastics in the world, which is 0.3 billion tons. But to give you some perspective, the next metal after steel is aluminum with 60 million tons per year. Distant second. If we want to go to the trillion joints per year club, we have resistant spot welding, which is something that AWS sort of gets into, but not really in as big a way as it does for arc welding and other fusion welding processes. Another thing is fasteners, which AWS really is not in, but it's actually an extremely important area of joining. It's a technology that can use, that can be taken apart. The joints can be taken apart and reassembled in many cases. Another is the engineered wood products, all the fastening systems for construction and wood. Another is soldering and brazing. Yeah, AWS is sort of in that, but mostly it's gone to other industries like the electrical engineers and the computer scientists and things. We can also look at what we defined ourselves, our motto in a sense, our purpose. In 1932, it was the science and art of welding, and I talked about how we vary through those things, and we finally ended up with the science, technology, and application of welding and allied joining and cutting processes worldwide, including brazing, soldering, and thermal spraying. Well, that's a mouthful, and if we actually start thinking about it, one thing that you can say, Edward Tufte points out, fuzzy writing is usually the result of fuzzy thinking. I consider this motto fuzzy thinking. You have to ask yourself, is the American Welding Society a welding society or a joining society? That's the first question. Or if you look at the new building down in Miami, you can ask, is it really just a brewery over here at the Carolina Ale House? What are our strengths for the future? Well, it turns out the United States is still the largest high productivity part of the world. If we look at highest productivity in the world, gross domestic product. There's some little places like Luxembourg and stuff here in Europe. But basically it's the United States, Saudi Arabia, because of all their oil money, and Australia and Canada and stuff, really dominate the world. So we are the world's market. And we have the responsibility to work on nearly everything in the world. So the next age is going to be the age of everything. Information and communications, computation, globalization, healthcare, biology, already approaching 20% of our gross domestic product in the United States. The service sector, tremendous growth over the last 30 years and will continue to grow and become dominant, just like agriculture was dominant 200 years ago. The service sector, education, quality, inspection, are some of the things that AWS should be involved in, must be involved in. So if we think about the fact that AWS was built on steel, what about these other materials? What about wood products? People are now designing 18-story buildings. This is a student dormitory in Vancouver, British Columbia, made of concrete and wood. Obviously there's some steel rebar in there, but it's not the same type of joining. If you want to be part of this new industry, you're going to have to think about whether you want to expand into the joining technologies in that industry. People are doing more with concrete. It's much larger than the steel industry. This is a building in Japan that has some fairly sophisticated design for concrete. These are industries. Concrete is growing much faster than steel in the world right now, and it will continue to grow for a number of reasons. So what's happening in the age of everything? One of the things that's happening is, if we look at the steel industry, people are going to be employed not for their strength and their brawn, but for their brains. This is a modern steel mill, air-conditioned pulpit, computer controls. The type of person that works in this industry today is different than the type of person that worked in the steel industry even 40 years ago. If we apply that to welding, we still think in terms of the welder with the mask and the heat and the humidity and all the other things that go along with being the welder with the skill to hold the torch. But in fact, we're getting to the point over the last 50 years that we're finally getting to the point where, just like we may have driverless cars, we're going to have automated welding, and a lot of that heat and humidity and dirt are not going to be things that some of the new millennial employees are going to be interested in. One thing in the age of everything also is safety. Safety is going to increase. Just like we had in 1943, people wearing their little doily dresses and stuff to weld, and people even today not paying attention to the hazards of the workplace. Safety is going to be more and more important. With this increased knowledge will be greater specialization. We already have, in the American Welding Society, certification programs. There's going to be more certification programs. We're also going to have to think about diversity, and I'm not just talking about diversity of the racial or ethnic, gender type of things. I'm talking about diversity of who we include. Electrical engineers have to be more a part of the Welding Society. Civil engineers, structural engineers, many people. And rather than dividing up the pie, we should start thinking about how to make the pie grow bigger rather than trying to get a bigger piece for ourselves of the existing size pie. So what do we need? We need a strategy for defining what we want to be. Are we a welding society, a joining society, or a brewery? A simple motto that articulates that strategy. What we see on the front page or the cover of the Welding Journal today is not a motto. It's not something that people could even repeat simply. We have to have something that says, what we are in simple terms. We need a spirit of cooperation and service to the society. What we don't need is competition. I talked about several things where competition has killed certain things. We don't need that. We need people to work out how they can work together rather than stonewalling one another to try to get more power and control. We don't really need more financial resources because, frankly, the publications, the conference, the FABTECH and certification has put AWS in a very sound financial position. What are you going to do with that? Well, one of the things I would propose is AWS create a Chief Knowledge Officer. Knowledge is power. Chief Knowledge Officer would be responsible for expanding into helping AWS become the leader, the place people would go. Just like you Google something when you want to find out something, when you want to increase your knowledge about something, they should be able to go to an AWS website, call up the AWS, and get information about non-metals, engineering wood, concrete, soldering, fastening, adhesives, things that we really don't play in right now. But we should be the resource. We should find out where the knowledge centers are for these things and be able to help disseminate that knowledge at no cost, just like Google does in many of their things and other people are learning. That if you don't worry about the money first and you just try to increase the knowledge, things will get better. Anything and everything joining, we should be the resource for. Knowledge is power. Chuck Vest, former president of MIT, said, when you share money, it disappears, but when you share knowledge, it increases. And he also said that one of the things he feared most in the world today is complacency. So in conclusion, I've always thought you should learn something new every day. Unfortunately, many of us are at the age that what we learn today, we forget tomorrow, but give it a shot anyway. Thank you very much.